So what are you? Man or Superman?
I haven't figured it out yet.
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso. And I don't have a clever segue here, so let's just talk about Smallville. Smallville was a then modernized take on the classic Superman origin story. And quite frankly, I think it's still to this day the best Superman show we've ever gotten. The only show to ever come close for me is the equally great Superman and Lois. And I'm not ranking one over the other. They share the same #1 spot. They are in the top in my tier list. But I'm not here to talk about what made Smallville great. I'm not here to shower this show in praise.
That comes later.
I'm here to talk about the day it died, and some of the contributing factors that led up to its death. So join me in this Kryptonian autopsy as we take a look back at the day Smallville died.
And that was the day the boy turned into Superman.
I think one of my biggest problems with the show has to come from the fact that it didn't really seem to know exactly what it was. It did have some identity of its own, it just felt really confused about what that identity was. At first, the show seemed like it was operating under the notion that it was in fact a pre-Superman Superman story. But as time went on, they kinda did a 180, and it felt more like an alternate take on the whole Superman story. In the beginning, as opposed to making Clark Superboy, they made him an ordinary teenager with extraordinary powers, which is probably for the best. A lot of problems Clark faced as a superpowered teen were either problems its core audience had had themselves, or alternatively were allegories for issues young people face. The show found interesting ways of incorporating characters from the Superman mythos. A young Clark Kent meets a young Lex Luthor in the first episode. They form a friendship which is really the overall heart and core of the series. Which is probably why when Lex left, so did a lot of viewers. Having these two have this friendship before they inevitably become arch enemies was a pretty brilliant decision. Does a lot of good for the overall Superman story. You get to learn more about both characters, how they compare, how they contrast, how they affect one another, and the fact that they have this history before the history that we know kinda adds more depth in their hero-villain arc. And while Clark and Lex had their back and forth, that was kind of the bigger picture and background of Smallville. The show was built around the dynamic between Clark and Lex, but operated episodically, bringing in villains of the week. Villains which were usually Clark's schoolmates that were infected and affected by the meteor that brought Clark to Earth. This change deviated from the mythos, but it was a really interesting inclusion. It made the villains of the week feel more earned and less tacked on. Although at some point, it did start feeling like, yeah, okay, alright, enough is enough. How much of this meteor is still in Kansas? Why is the entire school infected? And why is it only coming up all these years later? I mean, there is only so much room on the wall of weird. Eventually, the show obviously outgrew this method of storytelling, and they began introducing classic villains from Superman comics into the Smallville lore, which I think was welcome to a degree. Like, this was always going to be on the table. As odd as it may sound, Superman himself was never going to be enough to sell a Superman show. We needed a few more familiar faces. And masks. The fans demanded fan service. So it makes sense that they would introduce other established names to this canon. But I think they might have introduced about 10 too many. For me personally, the biggest issue came when they decided to introduce Doomsday. Doomsday, who is a creature brought into the comics for the sole purpose of providing a threat big enough to kill Superman. And that's Superman, who was already Superman, and had long been established as the man of Metropolis. The people of the city praised him. They loved him. They couldn't imagine life without him. Statues had already been made in his honor. Even looked up to this guy as if he were a god. Doomsday's sole purpose in the comics was to end the Kryptonian night. His one memorable moment was making sure the Man of Tomorrow didn't live to see tomorrow. And that's it. So to throw him into the mix before Clark even dons the cape just feels wrong. It feels like a mistake, and a pretty big one at that. And I think Doomsday's inclusion into the show is the perfect example of the fact that the show had done too much. There came a point in time where it being a Superman origin story just didn't make sense anymore. There came a time when Kal-El had gone toe-to-toe with all of his greatest foes, all before he ever became Superman. You gotta remember, by the time the series had ended, he's already met Mxyzptlk, he's already beat Bizarro, he's already stopped Zod, and he's already defeated Doomsday. Hell, he was even rocking his family crest. The Superman emblem was on his chest. He was already marketing himself as Superman without having been Superman. So really, what's left for Superman to do once he finally becomes Superman? I think you'd be excused for thinking that this show was no longer an origin story, but instead a brand new reimagining. Only for the series finale to do a complete 360 and confirm that this is in fact an origin story. If it's an origin story, what's left to do after it? What is left for this Superman to do after he finally becomes Superman? The transition into wearing his underwear outside of his tights just seems super unnecessary now. And don't tell me he did it to become a symbol of hope, because he kinda already was. He was already a superhero at this point in time. He might not have went by Superman, but he wore the Superman colors, he saved people in the way that Superman saved people, and he was known to the public the way Superman was known to the public. He was the red-blue blur. The only thing that changes in the series finale is that now they have a face to put on their hero. I don't know, it just feels like it was unnecessary at that point. It's just odd that Clark's out here rocking the Return of Superman black outfit before he wore his trademark classic Superman suit. Like, how are you gonna have the death of Superman before you even had the official birth of Superman? The math just isn't adding up. Someone call up Virgil Swan, because I need a scientific explanation for this. The show started off immediately having Clark crush on the girl next door, who didn't actually live next door to him, that being Lana Lang. His crush was at first kept secret, though I don't know who from, because anyone with eyes, ears, or a reasonable IQ would be able to tell that these two clearly had a thing for each other. And I think that's in part due to the fact that Tom Welling and Kristen Kruk had some incredible chemistry together. There was just something so pure and wholesome about these two characters together. Seeing them in their most vulnerable and intimate moments with each other just feels like watching a Hallmark movie. You know, minus the cheesiness and blatant religious propaganda. I'm serious, these two were adorable. They looked like the couple you would see on display in picture frames before you bought those picture frames. For so long, audiences of the show rooted for these two to become an item. Until they didn't. Like many shows that came before it, and like many shows that will come long after, this will they won't they pairing became a they shouldn't and I hope they don't pairing. After a while, it just became way too formulaic. Lana loves Clark, but Lana's dating someone else. Clark loves Lana, but Lana's dating someone else again. Now rinse and repeat for 7 years, and that is the Smallville formula. What really made this a hard pill to swallow is that the two together had something that felt effortlessly organic. There was something about Clark and Lana that just worked. It seemed real. And then it seemed really annoying, because it was. These two seemed meant for each other. But unfortunately, everyone who knew even the slightest bit about Superman knew they were never meant to be. When you talk about Superman's relationships, it's always Clark and Lois, never Clark and Lana. The show seemed intent on following that structure. They threw roadblock after roadblock after roadblock at the two. And at some point in time, the audience just became really exhausted with this.
I'm afraid you've lost my interest.
It was too much of the same thing without anything new ever taking place. You start off the show, Clark loves Lana, but Lana's with Whitney. Then Clark loves Lana, but she's dating her high school football coach, which, by the way, ew. I get why Jensen went to Supernatural. It was obviously the better career choice. You could either star in a series that's going to last the next 15 years, or you could continue to be a on Smallville. Doesn't really seem like a hard choice to make. Then she's dating and getting married to Clark's former best friend and current enemy, Lex Luthor. Oh, and then finally, a supersuit powered by kryptonite is physically attached to her, so that she actually physically, legitimately, could never get close to Clark. Wow, that's really beautiful. That's like a metaphor made by someone who doesn't understand subtlety. Or metaphors. The one time the show actually made the two an item, it quickly ended in disaster, with Clark's guilt over Lana's parents' death by meteor shower, and his constant need to keep his secret from her, which are factors that probably should have stopped him from dating her beforehand. It's weird that he wouldn't think of this prior, but then, and only then, when they're finally dating, did this become a problem. It just seemed like the show did whatever they could to pry them apart. all for the simple fact that she wasn't Lois Lane. Whatever sparks flew between the two in the earlier seasons of the show had long fanned out before they introduced the next lady in Clark's love life, Lois Lane. Speaking of which, I put a poll up on my Twitter asking those of you who watch my videos and follow me on social media who your favorite pairing from Smallville was. Clark and Lana, or Clark and Lois? And Clark and Lois just barely won it. I don't understand how, but they did. I really loved Tom Welling as Clark Kent. It just seemed like he was the perfect Superman sans name and cape. And after about a season or two, I really began to love Erica Durance's performance as Lois Lane as well. She took a character that is naturally bland and, well, I don't have any other expression, just bland, and made it fun and interesting. You know, her energy really informed the performance. But the two together? I don't know. I never really bought them as an item. They lacked any kind of romantic chemistry, and I think that's pretty evident.
I can't understand how there's absolutely no chemistry between her and Superman. I don't even understand how you're going to come together with him because there's no sexual chemistry there, and I don't understand where they're going with the thing, but I watch it every week.
I don't know, these two just didn't seem to click. At least not romantically. Like, I could totally buy the two being the best of buds, the closest of friends, but that's really about it. I didn't see them as being anything other than platonic. Their back and forth banter always felt natural, but it didn't have the sort of energy the show seemed to try to imply that it did. So when the show came to a close, I really loved both actors in the roles that they played. This was my Clark. This was my Lois. But they were never my Clark and Lois, if that makes any sense. I understand that not everyone shares this critique. Obviously, the poll that I put up is very indicative of that fact. But it's something that's always bothered me, and I needed to talk about. Although I will say equally unimpressive and cheap was the Ollie-Chloe romance. Now look, yes, I'm already sour over the fact that Black Canary is snubbed in favor of a lesser pairing, which history would only go on to repeat itself. But the fact of the matter is that this romance just comes out of nowhere. And it seems like the only reason these two become an item is because the show was ending and they wanted to send these characters off happy in a finale. I'm not saying that there wasn't any chemistry here. I guess I buy them as a couple. They're passable. But it could have been done so much better, and I really wish it was. Looking back at Smallville, it's important to remember that this show was made in the early 2000s. Not that that's hard to do, considering the soundtrack. At the time, superhero media was known to take a lot of liberties with their source material. What made it on panels wouldn't make it to screens. The X-Men went from yellow spandex to pleather fetish. Daredevil went from tights to, well, again, pleather fetish. That really seemed to be a thing at the time. And here on Smallville, almost every single superhero depicted in the series went from unique, colorful Comic-Con gear to hoodies. Yeah, that's it, hoodies! This was the 2000s way of validating the whole superhero look. Throw them in a hoodie, Luke Cage style. Oh, and if they have a mask, make sure you replace it with sunglasses. I guess all the early 2000s heroes were big fans of the Unabomber. I don't know. It was really overused, and the only person who didn't wind up looking totally goofy was Green Arrow. But that's mainly because he's always rocking the hoodie. Sunglasses were still dumb, though. Although I think the worst offender here might be Cyborg, who was only robotic on the inside, making him less of a cyborg man and more of a Terminator type situation. I don't know, I just didn't care for it. There was nothing wrong with his performance, I just didn't like his appearance. Outside of the outfits, there were some really unfortunate portrayals as well. I mentioned Doomsday being a poor choice for this canon, but I want to add that he was also pretty poorly done overall. The biggest criticism of Doomsday in the comics has always been that he's just basically the Hulk. But never before have I felt that statement to be more valid than when watching Smallville. The show didn't depict him as the hostile killing machine that he was. Here, he was a man in addition to being a monster, which I thought was pretty lame.
Hey, we need to kill Superman. Let's just pull something out of our ass. Oh, what'd we find in our ass? It was the Hulk. Who knew?
And while I do like his actor, Sam Witwer, this just wasn't it, man. It's not your fault, but I just never wanted Doomsday in my Superman origin show. But if Doomsday did, for whatever reason, show up, I would hope that he would be Doomsday and not Doomsday. I don't even understand what they were going for, because at first it seems like they were trying to make the man a victim of his own monster, but the two are separated and both sides of the character are shown to be soulless creatures anyway, so what was the point? Deathstroke was just a mistake overall. I mean, I'm surprised a Superman show made during this time would even mention this character, but in a lot of ways, I really wish they didn't at all. Mxyzptlk, as opposed to being an otherworldly entity, is now a metahuman. And now, instead of being able to manipulate reality, he can only manipulate people. This guy really didn't need to be Mixie, and in all honesty, outside the name, he really isn't. Tess Mercer was the show's attempt at making a Miss Tessmacher. Until they decided, nah, fuck it, we're not doing that, she's actually a Luthor now. And then after they did their big Empire Strikes Back twist, once they finally went through with their Halloween 2 arc, they did absolutely nothing with her. She was basically wasted until she was wasted. Then you have the Phantoms from the Phantom Zone. Kane and Batista, they seem perfectly in place. I mean, sure, they only did it because SmackDown was on the CW, but I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. But did you really need to get Little Bow Wow? How is one of Snoop Dogg's many nephews supposed to stop Superman? You will bow wow wow yippee-yo yippee-yay before me, son of Jor-El. I'm not gonna lie, that one line is the only reason I mentioned the Phantoms of the Phantom Zone. Even when characters were done properly, or at the very least serviceable on the show, it just didn't seem like they knew what they were doing with them. Supergirl's Fish Out of Water arc just randomly ends. Superboy completely disappears. One thing that's always annoyed me when it comes to this show is how the writers of the show would often write themselves into corners and then find a loophole to try to write themselves out of it. When Michael Rosenbaum decided to leave the series, the show's creators felt that they needed a Lex Luthor in place, so they created a literal Lex Luthor clone to fill in the gap. On one hand, it's nice to see more portrayals of the Lex Luthor character. I'm always in favor of it, because he's one of my favorite characters. Not at all because I could win a Lex Luthor lookalike contest, that has nothing to do with it. But even in saying that it's great to see more interpretations of Lex Luthor, let's face it, the clones were never going to match the performance of the original. Even when taking the time that he was afforded to play the role out of the equation, Michael Rosenbaum's performance was so strong, you could swear he had super strength. There was no comparing, and still to this day, I don't think that anyone's quite topped his performance. All this really did was constantly remind the viewing audience what the show was severely missing. Another bizarre case of odd backstory is the case of Superman's Kryptonian birth father, Jor-El. He's played by former Zod Terrence Stamp, at least in audio form. But then when he shows up in his younger years, he's now being played by Tom Welling. And then when we see him later, he's just some blonde dude. Am I really to believe that this guy becomes this guy? And that both of these guys are actually this guy? I mean, there's suspension of disbelief, and then there's whatever this is. I'm sorry, but no. But my personal favorite WTF, why would you make this canon moment, had to be when they decided to kill off Jimmy Olsen. Only to reveal that his little brother, who just so happens to look identical to him, is the real Jimmy Olsen. And what's even funnier about that is that this actor, Aaron Ashmore, looks identical to his actual brother, Shawn Ashmore, who appeared on the show in the first season. So well done, guys. All of that's not dumb or contrived or ridiculous at all. I also think it's a little bit of a cop-out just how often everyone cheated death. Like, sure, these things do happen in real life on rare occasion, but someone almost dies multiple times an episode. And even when characters did die, they so rarely stayed dead. They kill off Clark's father, Jonathan Kent, as is tradition. But he basically then becomes a Force ghost and comes back continually. So, that takes the sting right out of that. Lionel Luthor dies, and yet he still has a strong presence on the show after being buried. Although this is in the form of an alternate universe's Lionel Luthor. I'm also not the biggest fan of them retconning Clark's arrival on Earth as being completely predetermined. In an episode we learned the truth of the matter is that none of this was done by chance. Jor-El had actually met and chosen the Kents previously. Because of course he did! Also, I don't know if anybody else noticed this, but there was way too many weird connections between Clark and Lana's families. It's stated as early as episode 1 that Clark's adoptive father, Jonathan, used to date Lana's aunt. And then later we find out that Clark's Kryptonian father, Jor-El, comes down to Earth and falls for Lana's great aunt. So, like, what are we doing here? Like, what is this for? I don't know what this adds to the plot, but I can tell you what it's taking away. My enjoyment. Not to mention that the Luthor lineage just gets more and more absurd as time goes on. At first, we're to believe that Lex is Lionel's only son, only to shortly thereafter realize that there was another Luthor in the equation, Lex's younger brother Julian, who is no longer with us. But then we also learn that he has a long-lost half-brother named Lucas, and much later on, Tess Mercer shows up as his half-sister, replacing the Lena Luthor character. Like, alright, okay, we have more than enough of them now. I don't know, these random inclusions seem completely meaningless in the big picture, considering how little any of these characters outside of Lex impacted the story, but it also made the Luthor's past feel less linear and more nonsensical. Seriously, each and every Luthor after Lex is completely without purpose. But I think the thing that really drives me super shit crazy is the fact that everyone just gets and discards their powers. How many times was the normally normal Lana Lang given powers and then had those powers taken away? My count is at least 3. Actually, come to think of it, almost everybody gets powers. Temporarily. It's like they got the 2-week free trial and then they cancel their subscription to superpowers immediately. Peter becomes Mr. Fantastic for an episode. Chloe becomes walking truth serum, and later it's even revealed that she has the power to heal others. A power that comes into play all of once and then is immediately forgotten. I want to give the show credit in terms of how they utilize kryptonite and the meteor shower to create original villains of the week. Like, all of that seems pretty creative to me. Felt a little bit reminiscent of the whole Bang Baby situation in Static Shock, but it was interesting nonetheless, and I enjoyed this turn of events for the most part. But the use of this meteor infecting people and giving them superpowers, well, that shit got old really fast. Almost every episode in the first season is regarding that. The first season alone hits the audiences with one of these Kryptonian-stricken superhumans, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, and repeat this for a full season, and that is the first season of Smallville's formula. The way they incorporate these pieces of meteor into villains' origins was beyond extra. This guy uses kryptonite coals for a sauna. Now he has heat vision. This chick eats kryptonite-infused shakes. Now she eats people. These guys have kryptonite tattoos. At some point, you're just being excessive. Not even halfway through the first season, it was already overkill. I also thought it was kind of disappointing in the later seasons when all of a sudden the show ran out of original ideas, and then decided to just make episodes that are full-on movie parodies. I mean, that's something I could see easily working in a sitcom or a comedy, but in a coming-of-age Superman story, yeah, I don't know. I mean, one episode that shows The Hangover, and then the next, it's The Matrix. Ah, yes, the scary movie approach.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
I think this made it really evident that the show was losing steam. And considering that it ran for 10 seasons, that's not really an insult. That's to be expected. Not to mention, like I said before, they'd already done all there was to do. What was left at this point in time? And lastly, the most simple complaint I have, and I'm sure a lot of people share this minor annoyance, Smallville eventually stopped being about Smallville. In the later seasons of the show, a lot of the storylines, plots, and overall screen time took place in Metropolis. Which makes sense, as that's where most Superman stories usually take place. And as they progressed and got closer to Clark becoming Superman, it makes sense that the plot would follow him there. But what makes less sense is watching a show titled Smallville with entire episodes taking place in Metropolis. It's a minor gripe, but it's something I had to mention. In hindsight, I guess you could make an argument to say that the show's title was not a reference to Clark's hometown, but instead a reference to Clark himself, as that's the nickname that Lois gives him and almost exclusively calls him by.
Hey, Smallville.
Your personal space is about to be reinstated.
So, alright, I guess you can make that point. I don't like it, but I will accept it. So even with making this video and listing all of the negatives, I still love Smallville, all throughout, from season 1 to season 10. But I think around season 5 or 6 is when the show started on a downhill slope that it never fully recovered from, even with its unique healing alien DNA. These were some of the issues I had with the series, some of which I feel are contributing factors that eventually led to its demise, but overall I think it's all still good. This isn't to say that Smallville eventually became bad, it just became less good over time. Ultimately, I think seasons 1 through 5 were the highlight of the show. I mean, these were the seasons when the show was at its Superboy prime, with seasons 6 and 7 also having moments of sheer brilliance and nostalgia to remind viewers why they love the series to begin with. But even after that, even when it takes a turn for the more goofy, even when the series was hemorrhaging audiences' investment, I still think it's great for what it was, even if it wasn't always great. But that's just my point of view. Feel free to share yours in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video and want to see more Smallville content on this channel, let me know in the comment section below by saying, Average Sized Ville. With all that being said, I was your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
And in conclusion, I think Lex Luthor said it best when he said, Dad, you have no idea what I'm capable of.
That's from Superman?
Smallville.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.